Kia ora everyone, I hope you all had lunch. I had a kebab on rice if you're interested, and it's quite good. Right, we're going to the fast track approvals bill. Really important to know that this is the discussion of what's going to go into the submission, not the submission itself. Rebecca and John, kia ora, thank you very much for the work done on this so far. I know it is a complex beast. So over to you guys, and then we'll have questions, no doubt.
Kia ora koutou. Rebecca will be doing most of the presentation, just a little bit of scene setting. As the Chair has just mentioned, given the timeframes, we don't have a draft submission yet for your consideration, unfortunately, so we are seeking your endorsement of an approach to the submission. So we try to be as clear as we can on what the recommended approach is, and then seeking delegation to the Mayor, the Chair, the Deputy Chair and a member of Independent Māori Statutory Board to approve the final submission. So the approach is to acknowledge the Government's intention to introduce a fast-track approvals process through legislation, but to raise some pretty fundamental concerns with the legislation as it is. In fact, probably pretty significant concerns. So I'll hand over to Rebecca at this point, and she will take you through the issues that we've identified to date with the bill.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks, John. That was a really useful overview. So part of the background context is just understanding the purpose of the bill and why it's been introduced by the government. So the government's opinion is that large projects do take too long and they cost too much, and there's certainly evidence around that in terms of resource consenting costs. The other key concern that the government has relates to just how many avenues opponents to a particular project may utilise to seek different outcomes and to slow down that whole consenting process. And that the different consents or approvals that are required for a particular project really add to that overall cost and delay, and that some of the conditions and things that come forward through those different avenues can be conflicting. So overall, it's a very difficult consenting picture for an applicant on significant projects. So that's the reason, or the backdrop to having the bill, and the other reason for it is of the New Zealand First and National Parties coalition agreement to bring forward a fast-tracking regime to have it in the House within the first 100 days. So what has been introduced really addresses those key concerns that the government has around complexity, multiple applications being required in different jurisdictions, and multiple conditions that may be conflicting, and all the costs. And we can see that in terms of looking at what the system features are. What is in the bill is quite different to other fast-tracking proposals that we've seen before. So under the Resource Management Act, which is still in force, there are fast-tracking options available where an application may go directly to the Environment Court, for example, and the Council's first instance decision is bypassed. Under the COVID-19 recovery fast-track legislation, there were also fast-tracking provisions only for resource consents and notices of requirement. And also under the Natural and Built Environment Act, which has largely been repealed. The only part that's still in force is the fast-tracking proposals. So in all of the features that have already been included in earlier regimes, they've all been around RMA approvals, and the Council has always supported that for infrastructure projects. But this system is quite different because it includes more than RMA type approvals. It includes approvals under other acts. So it opens up the conservation estate by allowing use of conservation land. It allows approvals on reserves. So that includes the reserves that the Council owns and manages. It includes decisions made under the Wildlife Act to move different fauna. And there are a number of other examples that are explained in the committee report that you have. So it's much broader in its scope. The other part about it that is different is that it has a really strong development focus, going back, to address the government's concerns about things taking too long and not having a sufficient development really lens. But this bill, it takes away what the other legislation did do about still having expediency while still achieving sustainable management of natural and physical resources. This bill is just about getting it done, and we'll see that in a minute when we look at the bill's purpose. So it sets aside quite key parts of the Resource Management Act and the Conservation Act and those other acts under which approvals may be granted. So to speed things up and to reduce challenges, the system features limited public participation, and appeals are permitted but only on points of law to the High Court. So that's to make it all a lot faster. Another key change is that the role of government ministers is very strong. So ministers will have some really key responsibilities, and I'll highlight those in a minute. And in this process, an expert panel will still be required, just as it has been for other fast-track regimes, but in this case, the panel won't be a decision maker. The panel will evaluate the information that's put before it and then make recommendations to joint ministers to decide whether to approve a project and what kind of conditions should be imposed. A key feature of the bill is that some projects will default straight to an expert panel. There won't be a need for a decision about whether a project should be fast-tracked, and that process has just started. The bill, as introduced to the House, doesn't have that schedule in it listing all the projects that will go straight to a panel. That's under development at the moment. And the second part of that list that's being developed is deciding which projects are deemed to have regional or national significance, so therefore are likely to go off to a panel for evaluation. There's a third way a proposal can go through this process, and that's just by making a regular application to the joint ministers, who will then evaluate it. So all of those features are really about moving through the system as quickly as possible, and allowing multiple authorisations to be considered. So this is the bill's purpose. So it's about fast-tracking, facilitating delivery of infrastructure and development projects with those benefits. So what's missing from earlier regimes is while still promoting the sustainable management of natural and physical resources. The purpose of this slide is just to illustrate what the ministers consider when deciding whether a project should go on to a panel, whether it should be fast-tracked and go through that regime. So there are 5 key things that the ministers will consider. How they consider those matters is up to the ministers. It's discretionary. And as I mentioned a moment ago, some projects that appear in that list that's still being developed will automatically be considered to be regionally or nationally beneficial. I just draw your attention to the fact that under the RMA, we have rules in the Auckland Unitary Plan and also the Hauraki Gulf Islands District Plan that say some activities are prohibited, and that means an applicant cannot lodge an application with the council to undertake that particular activity. So it can't be considered on its merits. Just the basis of having that rule in a plan means that those particular activities cannot take place. What this bill says is it may be possible to do those prohibited activities. Just because a proposal and its bundle of whatever it is the applicant wants to do, it might include a prohibited activity. That's not a barrier to going through the fast track process and ultimately potentially being approved. So there is a role for local authorities in this process. An applicant who doesn't automatically default to the fast track must consult with the local authority before they lodge their application with the ministers. The joint ministers must seek the views of the relevant local authority, and so too must the panel when they're considering the proposals. The Auckland Council has the opportunity to suggest conditions and put forward some ideas in that respect, but only if the council has already commented on a particular proposal. There's an improvement over the COVID-19 recovery legislation in that there's a better ability to recover our costs because these are all really expensive processes, and under the previous legislation we were doing it free because we had no ability to recover those costs, so it's good that there's a slight improvement there. The council can appeal the minister's decision to approve or decline, and we may nominate a member to sit on the panel in evaluating a fast-track proposal. All the later responsibilities that go with consent still continue to reside with the council, and that has been problematic under the COVID-19 recovery fast-tracking system. And there are some concerns in that the relevant local authorities aren't defined in the bill. They only provide for one local authority. Auckland, obviously being a unitary authority, that's a great thing because there is only one local authority entity. But Watercare, for example, has assets outside of the Auckland region, and we would want to be involved in decision making that affected our assets and activities outside of Auckland. And council-controlled organisations aren't provided for. We would like to see them being more directly involved in the process. I mentioned before that the joint ministers are key decision makers in the whole process, so they decide whether projects go off to a panel, and importantly, they get to approve or decline a project when it comes back from a panel. They also have some additional powers that weren't featured in earlier legislation, in that they can direct a panel to reconsider the panel's recommendations, and they may also take other actions as summarised on the slide. Most of the joint ministers' decision-making powers are discretionary, and there are some other issues with the bill in that sometimes the statutory criteria are missing altogether, and that's probably a reflection of the fact that the bill has been drafted with great speed. So through the select committee process, I'm optimistic that some of those matters can be rectified, but it's a definite policy choice to give the ministers a very broad discretionary power. So the key issues that we've highlighted as a group of staff working across the whole council group are the ones on the slide and commented on in the report. There's no transparency in terms of those projects that are going to go on the fast track because they're not currently available in the bill. And the overriding of local plans is concerning because they're the result of public participation and the council's technical expertise and decision making from governors as to what should be in our local plans. So overriding those provisions is of concern. And there's also significant risk that there will be projects that come forward in the Auckland region that seek to develop land or intensify land use where we don't have adequate infrastructure and we don't have provision in place to ensure delivery of the necessary infrastructure that will affect our LTP decisions. So that is a concern across the council group and something that we wanted to highlight in a potential submission. And there's also concern that because of the bill having that single development focus, that poor environmental outcomes may result because there's no balancing of different legislative imperatives. There's no still achieving the outcomes under the Resource Management Act or the Conservation Act while facilitating infrastructure or other development projects, and that the legislation is a permanent fix as opposed to the COVID-19 fast-track legislation, which was a temporary measure just to stimulate the economy. So that we'll have lasting decisions where important parts of relevant acts are set aside, which is likely to lead to poor environmental outcomes. And then there are some practical implications too, in terms of the council's functions across the whole group, in terms of owning and looking after assets and wanting to avoid situations where applicants, or when they become consent holders, that they don't saddle the council group with assets that are inferior, that then cost more for the council group to maintain and operate. So we're looking to highlight that in a submission, and also to point out some really helpful tips in our submission to highlight what we've learnt from the COVID-19 fast tracking and how to, if there is going to be this regime, how to make sure it works better in practice, and use some of the case studies and examples that we have from the consents that we've previously processed in this way, or contributed to the processing, and also to try and improve some of the processes that are set out in the bill, because although it is intended to be really speedy and to get to decisions as quickly as possible, the processes as they're set out are very cumbersome and not at all efficient or practical. So there are some key points that we can add in there to try and get a better system as well as hopefully a better outcome. As John mentioned earlier, it's all happening very quickly. Submissions close on the 19th of April, and that's why we're unable to provide you with a full draft submission in the committee report today. So we're really seeking some feedback on, in terms of the recommendations that are put up about what the submission should cover, and making sure that we highlight those fundamental issues to which I just spoke in the submission, and trying to get the best outcomes possible for Auckland. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the work done on this so far, and I'm sure writing the complex submission it will be in the next few weeks. There are 2 questions so far, but I'm sure there will be more. Councillor Henderson first, and then I've got Member Henare.
Yeah, thanks. My first one is a little bit more, I suppose, technical. Looking at the Māori impact statement, is there anything in your knowledge in the bill around the Marine and Coastal Area Taku Taimoana Act and whether it will need to be consistent with that? Because I know legislation's going through, actually court cases are going through at the moment on that legislation. So do we have any insight there?
Kia ora. Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, we do know about that. There's a clause in the bill that looks to protect customary interests, including the legislation to which you just spoke, as well as treaty settlements. But there are a number of weaknesses in the bill in terms of broader Māori interests. For example, there's no Treaty of Waitangi Principles clause, and what the bill does in considering any RMA approval, it actually sets aside, that's a good example of some of the provisions in the RMA that are set aside. So the treaty principle in the RMA is removed in the consideration of resource management approvals under this bill.
Okay.
So there are some protections, but equally there are a lot of questions and some concerns about Māori interest, yes.
Thank you. That's really useful. And this sort of very different question, but I understand a lot of the rationale for the bill is that things are going too slowly. Are we looking at providing some sort of detail around things at a level like staffing for us? I know that last term in particular, resource consenting staff were huge. There's a huge shortage the whole time. I haven't heard whether that's still the case, but surely these kind of more small things may speed up the process, and is that part of our submission?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we're looking to do in the submission is highlight the fact that Auckland is actually a powerhouse and that we process more consents than any other local authority, probably more than all the other local authorities combined, and that the analysis supporting the bill produced by the government is deficient. So the only evidence supporting the bill is to do with the cost of infrastructure consenting. And we want to highlight the fact that we actually process a lot of consents and we do that really well.
Sounds fabulous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Member Henare.
Kia ora, Chair, thank you. 2 or 3 questions, and not really concerning the rights and wrongs of the bill, but more about our submission. How will the submission ensure that iwi authorities without treaty settlements are included in the consultation and the commenting process? That's one. I think I'll just rattle them off. In seeking changes to the bill from its current form, will the submission include a reference to the lack of a Treaty of Waitangi provision and the treaty principles? And will the submission highlight the sort of impact that lack of consultation will have on iwi and hapu with fast track projects and the potential down the line for future Waitangi Tribunal claims?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, I can answer all three of those questions because I drafted those provisions yesterday in the submission for consideration for the members who get delegated authority to finalise the submission, answering all those points. It is a concern that non-settled entities don't have a voice, and that's a matter that we're highlighting in the draft submission. And it is a concern, the lack of a Treaty of Waitangi Principles clause, and that's in the submission too, and also the risk of additional litigation, which may indeed from parties as a result of the treaty not being honoured, that will actually slow down projects, not expedite them as per the bill's purpose. So all of those matters are in draft form in the submission.
I'm interested to know whether or not those treaty principles provisions, what do they look like? It's all well and good to say, yes, we're going to have some in there, or we think there should be. I'm just interested in to know what they actually look like. What do they actually say?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I haven't, and the rest of the team, and pulling together the draft submission, we haven't suggested what the provisions in the bill should say in terms of actual clause drafting. We may do that. We may do that in some discrete instances where we have a solution already available to us from our experience on other matters in the bill, but I'm not proposing that the council group come up with those particular words. At this stage, it's more about highlighting the significance of the issues and making sure that the Environment Select Committee considers them, and we'll have the opportunity, the council will have the opportunity to speak further to the Select Committee in appearing in support of the council submission. Because there's a lot of work that's still got to happen on this bill. It's been produced at great speed. While the officials were drafting it, the Ministry for the Environment was doing some very limited engagement with local authorities and with some iwi entities. But they were writing it while they were still figuring out what was going in it. And that's why there are so many drafting issues with it. So there's a lot of work that the Select Committee will have to do. And I think this is a key area where they're going to need to focus, because it does raise a number of really significant issues in this space.
Thank you.
Good, I thank you, Member Henade. Member Ashby.
My colleagues already asked all of what I was thinking, so no need.
Perfect. Councillor Williamson. No question. Pardon? Not guilty. Maybe it was a nervous hand. All good. Okay, no worries. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. We had quite a bit of difficulty with the previous fast track legislation in the ward I represent. We were absolutely inundated with applications that were basically just circumventing the normal planning process, and in a number of instances, like with Strathmore down Nowri, where they were doubling the capacity that was enabled under the unitary plan. So my question is, as it stands, even though there's reference to regional and national significance, we still don't, we can still probably assume that developments such as occurred under the last fast track legislation could occur again. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So just that being the case, then I've looked at all the points, and in particular the ones around point 22 in our agenda, the issues with the bill in its current form. So our submission will look to cover all of those as articulated in our agenda.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just checking, Mr. Chair. There's any number of points there that I think are very valid ones, and essential for this submission. So I'm just checking that as it appears in our agenda, that's what we'll be picking up on as part of the submission process. So that provides a little bit of reassurance as far as the council's position goes. But I just wanted to be sure that they're all going to be captured and maybe not some left out. Yes,
through
is
Chair,
the answer I'm looking
Councillor
for.
Watson, John Duguid here. So the recommendation A is the high-level summary as per the slide we have on the screen here, but absolutely, Rebecca and others have been drafting the submission because of the tight time frame, and all of those sub-points that you refer to in paragraph 22 are in the draft submission.
Great, thanks very much.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. Probably a question for you, John. What kind of transport or water projects could this usefully apply to?
Through the Chair, as mentioned in the report, if the bill goes through in this form or some amended form, I'm sure it will be amended, then Auckland Transport Watercare could seek to go through a fast-track process. I can't mention, I don't know any specific projects that they may have in mind. In the past, they've making space for water, potentially, but I guess until we see where the bill lands, we really wouldn't know whether that's appropriate for council or the CCOs, or whether the normal process is. So it's really difficult to comment on projects like that. Sorry.
Sorry about that. And then to you, Chair, I've had a conversation with you before today's meeting about highlighting the, paragraph 25H by way of an amendment or not, well, an extra emphasis, because I think, and I reserve my right to speak, but are we, I think, I'm trying to turn this into a question, are you confident that the extra emphasis on local input will be relevant? Will not be relevant, will give more strength to the fact that Auckland can have a say as opposed to Wellington dictating?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, and thank you for contacting me on this in our discussions with yourself and the Mayor's office to try and get the wording correct. So I'll move, we're not finished questions yet, but I will move what's there, and Deputy Mayor said she would second, but as instead of an amendment, I'm happy to obviously incorporate her wording, which is A4, which is just tweaking A4 and making us sort of clearer, I guess, on local voice or how we get that discussion happening on individual projects.
Okay, and my last question is really to you, Your Worship, because I've discussed this with you as well. So although it goes via the Mayor, I just want confirmation from you that that would be a drop-down system, that obviously it would be your input from the local councillor and the relevant local board, therefore / local community, that would feed up the big triangle into your input. Would that be correct, Your Worship?
Yeah, well, it wasn't just my views. It was me as the representation of the views of those around me who have input to it. I have checked with the mayors of Christchurch, Kaipara and Whangarei, and they're all going to add something or other along those lines as well as a way. It's seeing as the thing has a flavour of it being run from the top, it's ministers, and yet in most cases there'll be some flunky below them. I think we thought we'd put mayor there as well, kind of at that, so that the whatever's going on will determine whether we've organ grinders or monkeys involved. But the idea is to match one with the other. But it wasn't just to give me the ability to just willy-nilly offhand give my views on everything. I don't have them on most things, but it would be as a recognised representative of the council. Okay? And so the nominee is there. So in certain incredibly complex, boring ones, I'd send Mr. Duguid along there.
Thanks. I reserve my right to speak if you could just put me
think
down
this-
for that. But I just wanted that clarification because it looked as if in the recommendation it was just the mayor. So I just wanted that clarification. Thanks.
I think Mr. Dogood missed your comment there, Mayor, but I'm sure he'd love to do the boring ones. Are there any more questions? I know there's, Councillor Ferry has a hand up, but I just want to make sure you may have I know that Councillor Ferry is foreshadowing an amendment as well, but do you have questions before that? Okay, Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. Yeah, I do have a couple of questions. So, just from just clarifying, this doesn't have a sunset clause, does it? No. And so, past fast tracking type approaches have usually had sunset clauses. Is that correct?
Yes, and through the chair, yes and no. So, because there's more than one legislation that provides for fast tracking. So the COVID-19 recovery fast tracking did have a sunset clause. It was really particular. The legislation was about stimulating the economy, providing a certainty of investment while still achieving RMA outcomes, and it was only enforced for several years. The Natural and Built Environment Act, which has largely been repealed, the only parts that are still enforced are the fast tracking provisions. So the government has achieved what it set out to do in terms of its 100-day plan of getting this into the House and having a bill on the floor. But it doesn't actually need to keep going on with it because they can rely on the existing provisions in the Natural and Built Environment Act that remain in force. And that was a permanent system. And the RMA, which is still in force, that also, is just been resurrected, but that also has permanent provisions that allow for fast tracking in particular circumstances, like having proposals go straight to the Environment Court.
Okay, so so the fast tracking that is currently enabled under existing legislation, putting the COVID one to one side. So how does this bill then allow, like this is looking at a whole range of different acts that it's fast tracking across, is that correct? Whereas the other one was much more the two provisions, the RMA provision, natural built environment provision, were both relatively narrow, is that correct?
The COVID-19 recovery legislation was the narrowest, just resource consents and notices of requirement. And the Natural and Built Environment Act also for those things, but broader in terms of the kinds of resource consents that could be sought. So under the Natural and Built Environment Act, you can have things go through the fast track that are not just infrastructure or housing, but other network utilities and also sort of more social infrastructure networks like healthcare and education. But this is next level again because it's any kind of RMA approval for any kind of activity, apart from a very few listed ineligible activities, and then also the use of the conservation estate and allowing authorisations on reserves land and allowing access arrangements for Crown minerals and a number of other permissions as well.
Yeah. So with what I wanted to specifically understand in detail from that is the impact on prohibited activity. So my understanding from reading the report is that potentially this will allow the overruling of prohibited activity. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that is different to all the other legislation. So that's what we're suggesting in the report is a challenge to local voice and all the processes that we go through in terms of forming RMA plans and deciding with communities what's the appropriate use of land and resources.
Okay, that seems like a pretty significant issue. Yeah, okay. I had one other area of questioning, and yeah, I am foreshadowing an amendment. The regionally and nationally significant, how that is determined, and do we have a role in determining whether something is regionally or nationally significant beyond the fact that we may be an applicant, which we've just discussed that with the Deputy Mayor's question. But do we have it, is that just totally ministerial discretion?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it is ministerial discretion. There are a number of matters listed in the bill to which the ministers may have regard, but they may have regard to other matters too, or to none of the matters that are listed in the bill. what I would imagine we would do as a local authority in putting in our comments on a fast track proposal would be to highlight the matters that we would want the joint ministers to consider in deciding whether to take that project and refer it to the fast track. And also in the submission, we're suggesting that the criteria be made mandatory rather than discretionary, so that there's a more certain decision-making framework, which is great for local authorities and communities, but also provides more certainty for applicants as well.
Yeah.
And also to tie some of those decision-making criteria to the work that we're required to do as local authorities ourselves. So, for example, under the NPSUD, which you're probably sick of talking about today, we're required to do the housing and business development capacity assessment. So my recommendation is that in the submission we look at tying, is something nationally or regionally significant for a housing proposal? How significant is that housing proposal against, through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, that's correct, but we don't yet know what those projects are.
No. Okay, and just as sort of a, I guess, a process question then, so the submissions close on the 19th. Are we likely to have any, that's 8 days away, are we likely to have any more clarity on the content of the bill before we finalise our submission?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, we will have no clarity about that. The government has announced its process has now been stood up. A technical advisory group has been established with 4 or 5 members, and applications are now open, and that panel will scrutinise those applications that will come in up until the 3rd of May, so well after the close of submissions, and then there'll be a further decision-making process about which projects will be listed in the bill. So one of the things that we've put in the report and suggested is that we talk to those matters when we present to the Environment Select Committee in support of our submission, because some of those projects may well be in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and we may well have a view on the suitability or not of those projects.
Or indeed wish to seek inclusion of projects that aren't on the list?
Yes.
Okay, okay. I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. No. I have a couple of questions, and then just if there's, I'll be the last unless there's anyone else who wants a question on this. I have a couple of questions. So there was obviously a lot of discussion before on the NPSUD. So this is quite a different fast track that it will and could ignore our zones completely. So do you want to just go through what that might look like? So a large-scale development in a rural zone, or a special character area, or an apartment building in a zone which is not appropriate or not under our unitary plan or zoning. Is that correct? That could just happen with no consultation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. So there's no limit about zones in the bill as it's set out. So the bill does list a number of projects or activities that are classified as being ineligible, but they're ineligible for a project to be referred. There might be a project that is ineligible, but it gets listed, so it goes off to the panel anyway. But to go back to your specific question around ineligibility and zoning, no, there's no limit on what kind of projects might come forward on what zones. So in order to address the concern about out-of-sequence development and about further drain on the council group's purse and being out of step with our strategic decision-making, what we're suggesting goes in the bill is adding to that list of ineligible activities by linking to the government's national planning standards and how they have a unifying system for zones, and saying, hey, don't allow anything on the future urban zone or on rural zones if they are housing activities, and just coding them up to fit within the government's zoning framework.
Thank you. The question I have around a Māori impact or mana whenua, the effect on the Treaty of Waitangi. So it's quite focused around it won't affect settlement areas, but this changes. Is it correct that I'm understanding that mana whenua views wouldn't be considered broader than that in most areas, say coastal, say, on most of our resource consents and plan changes, we have extensive work with mana whenua or mātāwaka groups to ensure the effects. Is that correct, that just won't happen now?
Mr. Chairman, there are some protections in the bill that recognise the rights and interests of Māori, particularly those who hold customary rights in the manner that we talked about before, and where there are treaty settlements. There are no provisions for any iwi authorities, there are very few provisions for iwi authorities that don't have treaty settlements. So it's concerning that the bill is deficient in that way, and that there needs to be amendments made to the bill to make sure that iwi interests are appropriately provided for, so that the right people are able to comment on applications of the kind that you mentioned. Because at the moment, the way that it's drafted, there's no guarantee that all the right people will have a place at the table.
Okay. And on, so my understanding and what I've seen, resource consents and plan changes, community might oppose those things, but they still get approved. But the process is where we get better outcomes. So on water, on the effects to the community, or tree planting when you cut down several hectares of trees and things. There is no opportunity for those sorts of. There will be no opportunity for those sorts of negotiations or arrangements, will there? Council will not be able to impose conditions or, basically improve what the community might see as a bad development or a bad project or.
When the council participates by providing comments on a proposal and including comments on potential conditions, the council will have to bring its knowledge and experience to bear in terms of what outcomes are sought and what kinds of conditions are recommended for inclusion if a project does get approved. Certainly those individual community groups or environmental groups will not have a seat at the table, because it's only about providing for particular Māori interests, local authorities and directly affected landowners, not a wider community participation in any of the processes, which is one of the key aims of the bill, to get things approved faster and have fewer challenges. But certainly the council, in putting in its comments on conditions, can seek those kinds of mitigations. And one of the things that we've suggested in the draft submission is that, unlike the COVID-19 situation, where there were very few hearings held and all the information was just done on the papers, just written comments put in, that there needs to be a better kind of process, so that it's more like a mediation kind of situation, where there can be people sitting around a table or doing something online to get better conditions that are more appropriate, that address those concerns, and are also better for the council group, because like I said before, we don't want to get saddled with assets that aren't any good, or conditions that we can't monitor and enforce.
Thank you. I think that is the end of questions, so I'll get you both to. Oh, sorry, there is another question, Councillor Theory.
Yeah, sorry, thanks for a second chance. It's a question around the wording of the resolutions. So in what's currently A, 3I and 4I, IV, we're referring there to supporting if it's enacted in its current form. And I'm just thinking, if we're seeking changes, doesn't that mean it's no longer in its current form?
Okay, so we just would it make sense, Deputy Mayor, if we just, if it's enacted?
Yeah, stop there.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, because my amendment speaks to in its current form, so I want to be clear with my wording when I put it up, that it's, at the moment, we seem to be saying, we have some issues with it in its current form, and then we're saying, but if it is in its current form, we want these changes, but the changes would mean it's not in its current form. So is there a reason that we've used that wording?
Thank you for pointing that out. I agree, it definitely could be improved. I think the purpose of that drafting was to highlight that plan changes are currently not part of the proposal, and we like that, because allowing plan changes to be included would be a very retrograde step in the bill.
Yeah,
so just acknowledging that they're not currently a feature, but thank you for bringing that to everyone's attention.
So it's okay for 3, but we would probably want to take it out for 4 then. Yeah, because we are asking for some changes there, whereas in 3 we're saying this is a particular bit we like, so in its current form would stay, whereas these are bits we don't like. Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you. That helps with...
Wait, did we take it out of the wrong?
No, that's the right way around. Okay, thank you.
Right. There are no more questions. We'll just double check. Yeah, if you, Deputy Mayor, if you'd like to speak at, you might want to, even though I've moved it, but I'm happy for you to speak first, and then Councillor Ferry will go to her amendment after that. If you'd just like to step back from the table so we don't debate at you, thank you both very much. Huge amount of work and very complex and very quick.
So thanks, Chair. Look, I must admit the bill gives me some concern, right? But I am sort of confident that in our submission we're doing the best we can to sort of put some brackets or some support around where it's sort of currently going. I suppose what I'm really saying here is that one of the things I'm absolutely a fan of is council's ability to have a say. And I mentioned in my questions, but just before the Mayor dashes out, I think it's really, really important that as a council, and we're using the Mayor as the figurehead because our Mayor is the head of our council, that they have, there is a list of, and a series of people behind the Mayor that will actually have a say on what's happening here. And that is the councillor, the local board / local community. And that gives me a little bit more comfort. I mean, we do need, and our CCOs do need fast tracking for some things. And I understand that, which is kind of leading me to a point to helping them get that through. And I've been told that, for example, the blue-green networks might be eligible and that will get them done faster. So that's kind of giving me a bit of hope. I will say, and this is sort of coming to a bit of a theme, isn't it? The GPS, the work that we did earlier, and this all depends on our discussions with central government in those meetings, because it's really important, Mayor, for you to be really clear that Auckland, and I know you've said it on multiple occasions, but Auckland does want to have a voice at the table. It doesn't want 3 ministers on their own, 2 of which don't even live in the city, having a say and we not having a say. So I just think that strength of Resolution 4A is absolutely key. On B, the reason for B is, look, this costs us money. We came across this under COVID and other things, and I just think absolutely if it's going to happen, we do want to be able to recoup those costs. But it is a submission only. I think it covers a lot of the concerns that people have, and concerns I have, if I'm honest with you too. But whilst we'll put the submission in, and I know that you and Angela and the Mayor and a member of the IMSB will see that final submission, I still feel that the success of where this bill ends up will be in that discussion that the Mayor has with the relevant ministers. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Now, Deputy Mayor and myself have moved the recommendations. Councillor Ferry would like an amendment by addition and has a seconder, I understand, of Shane Henderson. So, because I hadn't had a chance to understand this before the meeting, Councillor Ferry has proposed this and we aren't including it within, but we can now debate that. If you'd like to lead on this one, Councillor Ferry.
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of the things I just heard from the Deputy Mayor would line up with adding this. So this would be a new A3 and then we renumber the ones that come afterwards. I think what we've heard from staff, the deep reservations that are, worded in typically our diplomatic officer language, but really I think speak to the fundamental, well, it's put in the recommendations as fundamental issues. I think we should just be really clear here and say that we oppose the bill in its current form. That doesn't mean that we can't also say, hey, we like this bit and we'd like these bits changed. That is part of the process, right? And I know most of us around this table have probably been part of making submissions to central government before on legislation, opposing it, in support. Either way, still seeking changes. So I don't see that in any way as contradictory. I wanted to put this image up. So this was produced by a journalist, and it shows the difference between what we have had under the COVID-19 and where we're heading. What you can't see that's cut off down the bottom there, those are all individual pieces of legislation, not just the RMA. So this is a really significant step. Thank you, that's it. That actually really fundamentally undermines local decision making, not just by Auckland Council, but by local government right across the country. It's a shame that we don't have our friends from the Character Coalition still here, because one of the things that could be done through this quite easily would be to abolish all special character areas in our city, as an example. The reason I asked that question about prohibited activities, I mean, that's massive. Being able to just have effectively 3 ministers decide, actually, yeah, we know you prohibited this activity for years and years in this specific area for a really good reason, but actually we're going to overrule that, and that's a huge leap. I think there's a real opportunity here to get some changes, but I think we need to be really clear as Auckland that we do oppose it in its current form, and that's why I've put forward this wording. I think also I'm really concerned about there being no sunset or review clause. That would be another thing that I think we should probably raise, because governments change, as we all know, me possibly more than most around this table, and ministers change too. They're not always there for the duration, even of a single term. So if we want to actually make this something that's robust and lasts the distance and becomes a useful piece of legislation, then it needs to change radically from where it is now. And for that reason, I think we should add in words that specifically and clearly state our opposition to it in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So now we are debating the amendment only, and then if that is won or lost, we can debate the substantive again. So I think we now have Councillor Henderson who wants to debate the amendment only. Kia ora.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks, Councillor Ferry, for your amendment. I'm really happy to second it. I was actually thinking of the Character Coalition as well, that, you know, it's no secret that we don't agree on policy. That's totally fair, but I respect absolutely their right to have their say in a democracy and attempt to sway people to their point of view, right? And that's just an example. We've got hundreds of pressure groups out there that do that for us, and I think it's really healthy and really great. Don't get me wrong, right? If this does go through, I don't need to speak on the substantive, so I'll just speak once if that's okay, Chair. But, you know, if this does go through, I think we do take a really positive and a really constructive approach to try and make this work for Auckland, because, you know, we can suggest things in, we can take things out, we can try and lobby in much the same way that the community groups do. But that doesn't actually stop us from opposing the passage into law, based on the really fundamental issues that have been highlighted by staff so well. You know, I remember the huge controversy around the interest in seabed mining off the west coast in Muriwai. That was just about sort of 2009, 2010. You can still see the occasional sign as you drive up there to this day, you know, about that stuff. Kiwis Against Seabed Mining was formed, and I want to shout out to them as a really influential group. They made their voices known and they won the day, and I think that anyone that loves the West Coast, as I do, really is indebted to their work and their lobbying. This kind of grassroots community action can create change, and it can really benefit a community. And, you know, we know that more than anyone else really as councillors, but we need to really enshrine that in a decent democratic society, protect that right for people. And I think that right is really affected negatively. It's really impinged by this bill. Kiwis Against Seabed Mining is actually still going really strong. I was just checking out their website earlier, and they state some really good stuff about this bill in particular. I'll just sort of borrow from their work, if you don't mind. 10 different acts that protect the environment under threat if this bill passes as is. There's every chance that corporate interests will be prioritised over protection of nature and protection of people. And those are the very things that make our city what it is, right? At worst, it opens the floodgates to environmental damage. It may even open the floodgates to multinational companies that come here, opening up extractive industries like the seabed mining example that will give them mega profits, but it leaves us with the cost, the environmental cost to clean it up and to repair communities. I'd just echo that there's very little in the way of checks and balances in a democratic society in this proposed legislation. Leaving it up to a very small group of people is quite a scary prospect. And as I highlighted in the questioning, there's just not enough in the way of protection for Māori, Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I think that's not satisfactory, and it's not where the country has been going for a long time. Finally, I just add again that we need to commit to a principle where council actually governs the local affairs of the city. We're elected here on a mandate for the community. We work really hard for that mandate, and that's continuing every day, right? It's not just an election thing, it's every day. So we have a valid role to represent our communities that we were elected for and the wider Auckland. So, I think it's just about time that governments of all stripes actually respect that role and give it more credence and give it more strength. So that's me. I'm really happy to second the amendment. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you for your contribution. Member Henare.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I might agree with the last speaker and also Councillor Ferry, I'm more interested in the fact that from my political point of view and sort of helicopter view of politics at the moment, this thing's going ahead by hook or by crook. My main concern about all of this has been the absolute lack of a Māori protection mechanism, whether it be the treaty, consultation with iwi, mātāwaka, and also the absolute sidelining of the Minister of Māori Development, in this case Tama Pōtaka, which I think is reprehensible, given the import of what the government is trying to do. And look, I could get wrapped up in the hyperbole about the nasty nets and the blah 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 blah, but at the end of the day, yeah, they're the government, and they want to kick the so-called economy into gear. And I think it's my responsibility with Haukura Independent Māori Statutory Board is to make sure that the council, in a submission on the bill, protects the rights of iwi in Tāmaki and also mātāwaka as well. So I sort of can't, I know where you're coming from. I can't support the Councillor Ferry's amendment, but I will support the council's submission only if we can see it before it is delivered to the select committee. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Member Henare. Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm just sitting here listening to this stuff and trying to just sort of settle it with my observations and what I hear and stuff. What I worry about with this is that the resource management industry has grown so great over the last few decades, And you hear everybody around the place saying it's not working, it's not bringing the results it says it's going to bring, it's impossible to work with, it's bringing huge cost and stifling our private lives and our economy, and not delivering on the environmental stuff it says it will. And then I see both the last government and this government fast-tracking themselves past the problems. That's how I see it, and that's how a lot of people see it. And so this is proof that, so all I'm worried about here is that we sidestep the real fix we need to do by allowing only a portion of our society, in this case the government, past the problems that we're all struggling with. So I don't know whether I'm going to support it or vote against it. I just see it as just one issue in a much more complex problem, which needs to be addressed overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, look, thank you, Chair, and appreciate your indulgence now online. And look, I want to say to Julie and to Shane, I won't be voting for this amendment. That's not. I don't believe that this is a political exercise, and certainly I'm not voting my politics. But my view would be I try and look at submissions that come before this council and simply address the substance of the issues contained in the bill, the matters that need to be resolved, and those matters that have been omitted that should be resolved. And Member Hanare is right. This bill is going to go ahead. I think that there are a lot of things about this bill that make it a dog, but I would sooner vote for resolutions that are additive and try to address it. Truth be told, there is a proposed RON in my ward that I would like that to be fast-tracked for consenting purposes. So I do want some legislation to pass to give effect to that. The matters that people have raised, which are legitimate matters of concern, do need to be codified in the submission, and I would like to see that too. But to have a project where a notice of requirement was considered as part of a judicial planning process in 2016, but it has been stalled ever since, is quite deficient. So I do want to see a fast track. This bill isn't perfect, but I don't want to outright oppose it. I want to improve the bill, so I won't be voting for this, Chair. My vote against this amendment can be recorded, but I do support the other matters that have been discussed being incorporated into this submission, because I do think that the matters raised, if they were incorporated into the bill, would make for a better bill that hopefully people can support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'm sort of on the same page as Daniel and Toe, really. I think that whilst I do oppose some issues, do think that they haven't quite got it right, I do think to start a submission process with, the fact that we oppose a bill in its current form isn't helpful. I'd rather be positive and talk about the changes that we feel that the bill could do in a positive environment. I mean, this is negotiation, isn't it? This is about coming to the table. And I think coming to the table with some improvements, right? And the risk for us, if we start with a no, just takes us a little bit further to get to zero. So, yes, I have concerns, but I want to be positive, and so therefore I go back to the original place where we were at, and I'm comfortable about that. And I just feel that's a good place to start as opposed to adding another negative.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll just briefly... Oh, Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure that people are over-expanding the coverage of this. I think there's a general desire from the public for some of the really big, important economic projects that we need in the country to not be hampered by some of the objections that can just add fortunes to a particular project. I was Transport Minister who put forward and got the approval to go with the Albany-Puhoi motorway. I expected it to be finished by 1996, and by 1999 we were still tied up with coloured speckled trout in a creek somewhere in the Environment Court that went round and round. I don't think this is ever going to be a mechanism that's used down by a developer building some apartments, and I don't think the government would get into that, or if they did, they'd get the public opprobrium belted back on them. So I'm actually in favour of saying if there are some really big things for which we could get phenomenal benefit to the nation economically, then let's have a mechanism that stops every man and his dog from putting objections in, as long as the government understands, and I can tell you they will always, all governments, every government will know, they move in the wrong direction on this stuff against what the public opinion is, they'll lose at the next election. So they'll always be cognizant of it. So I just think you've got to be a bit careful. I hear so many people here worried about the impacts of a whole range of things that might affect them locally or a developer or whatever. I reckon the number of actual projects that go through this process and get the approval will be a quite small number, and they will be really, really big national significance type projects. So I'm fine with council putting a submission in as this to let your views be known, but I would not be anywhere near as afraid of some of what the outcomes of this might be as some are.
Thank you, Councillor. Any last requests? I'll briefly speak to it. Look, I wasn't going to support noting our opposition because I was trying, as I was trying in the last agenda item, to work with the government and not be adversarial, but we just sort of voted against the approach from the government in the last one for almost the same reason as this one. The reason why I will support this is because it is by addition. I said to Councillor Ferry, is it by addition or replacement? If this was the only thing that was coming in, I would have voted against it. This is going to be one of the very many list of resolutions, if this passes, that will go forward. So it is factual. It is factual. Our submission, we oppose the bill in its current form because we're trying to approve it in however many, the long list of ways in the full resolution. So this just basically says what we are doing, because I do oppose the bill in its current form. To what Councillor Williamson says, I mean, the current fast track has had well over 100 items, and they're everything from roads to housing developments and apartments, and quite significant. So there will be, this is expanding the number of projects it can be. So it will inevitably be far more projects, and it will include housing in different zones, which the current fast track is already doing. The difference with the current fast track is it's far more, at least the local boards have a say, the Mana Whenua have a say, and there is ways to improve it. This is quite a change, a dramatic change into what our communities and what we would expect to have a say. It is not about stopping, and I agree things could be faster. Most of the time it's money. Most of the time, in my experience, from 2020 on, projects in and out have been to do with money, not necessarily consenting. We've had tons and tons of consented projects that sit there because we have no money. So our issue often is that a road or a project triples in price to $3 or $4 billion, and we pull it off the table, as we're doing through the RLTP, the exact same thing. We've got consented works happening that we're going to pull off the table due to money or the GPS or whatever, the fuel tax, etc. So for me, this is just exactly showing what we're doing. We're opposing the bill in its current form. This will, if this passes, this will go into the long list of ways we're trying to improve the submission, and then when we speak at select committee, we'll be able to very clearly say the council opposes it in its current form, and these are the ways that we would like to move forward in improving the bill, understanding that the government and council and the community expect good infrastructure projects and important things for the city to move forward a lot faster than they do. So I will go to a division on this one, just because I think people have asked for their names to be recorded for or against. And yes, that's all.
Thank you. So members, you're voting on the amendment for item 10, which is on your screen. Councillor Hills.
In favour.
Member Ashby.
Aye.
Councillor Baker.
Against.
Councillor Bartley.
For.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Ferry.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fooley.
For.
Member Henare.
For.
Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Leone.
For.
Councillor Newman.
Opposed.
Councillor Sayers is not present. Councillor Simpson. Deputy Mayor Simpson. Sorry. Councillor Stewart. Against. Councillor Turner.
Against.
Councillor Walker.
For.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Williamson.
Against.
Could I just clarify, Member Ashby, your vote?
It's for.
I think it's against on there.
Oh. So that's 12-6 carried.
Right, that was carried 12 votes to 6. That will go into the substantive. So we'll just wait a couple seconds and then we'll go. We should be able to see. So what is happening now, just for those online, this 3I will go into the overall, it will be slotted in after A, I think. Cool. Are there any comments on the overall substantive items?
Well, look, Chair, it's Councillor Newman here. Look, can I just ask that I'm happy for the whole thing to go through, but for my vote against this particular provision being recorded, other than that, I'm happy with the balance.
Thank you, Councillor. Right. Don't think there's anything to speak to. All those in favour? Any opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Wait, sorry. I'll just do that again because there's a bit of a delay. So all those in favour of the substantive motion? Aye. Wait for a gap. Are there any opposed? Thank you. And Councillor Newman.
Opposed on a Roman numeral 3.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Right. We will. Was there any abstentions? No. That is carried. Thank you. And now we'll go on to, where are we? The